Hey, tailgaters! Ross of the Pigskin Tales podcast here. The buzz of summer and the anticipation of the college football season is in the air. It's the perfect time to gear up with Home Field, a premium collegiate apparel brand based in Indianapolis. They have over 150 plus college designs to choose from, each one showcasing a unique part of your team's history. My personal experience with Home Field has been exceptional. Their apparel is comfortable and their vintage designs bring back fond memories of my alma mater. So as the excitement for the upcoming college football season builds, make sure to visit Home Field's website at homefieldapparel.com. Get ready today for the upcoming season and represent our favorite teams in style with Home Field. Again, that's homefieldapparel.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of Yesterday Sports on the Sports History Network. Today, in part 6 of our series on the best NFL teams of the 1970s, we're going to look at the second best team of that decade, and that would be the Dallas Cowboys. After an embarrassing 54-13 loss to the Vikings in Week 5 and a humiliating 38-0 loss to the Cardinals on Monday Night Football in Week 9, the 1970 Cowboys were 5-4, and the playoffs seemed out of reach. They beat the Redskins 45-21 in Week 10 to up their record to 6-4. They now needed to win their next 4 games to have any chance of reaching the playoffs. They won those 4 games and outscored their opponents 108-15. They played the Lions at the Cotton Bowl in the playoffs and won 5-0. Now it was on to Kezar Stadium to play the 49ers in the NFC Championship. They beat the 49ers 17-10 and were off to sunny Miami to play the Colts in Super Bowl V. Colts kicker Jim O'Brien kicked a field goal with 5 seconds left in the game to give Baltimore a 16-13 victory. Cornerback Mel Renfro, linebacker Chuck Howley, guard John Nyland, and defensive tackle Bob Lilly made the Pro Bowl. Howley also made All-Pro and was named Super Bowl MVP. Running back Dwayne Thomas won the Rookie of the Year award. The 1971 season started much like 1970, with the Cowboys looking like champions one week and then looking like also-rans the next. They were 4-3 at the midway point, and Coach Tom Landry couldn't decide on a starting quarterback. Roger Staubach was given the starting job in Week 8, and the Cowboys never lost again for the remainder of the season. They finished the regular season with an 11-3 record and traveled to Minnesota for the playoffs, where they beat the Vikings 20-12. They would play the 49ers in the NFC Championship for the second year in a row. They won 14-3 and were on their way to New Orleans for the Super Bowl, where they easily defeated the Dolphins 24-3 for their first World Championship. Roger Staubach, Chuck Howley, Bob Lilly, John Nyland, Mel Renfro, tackle Rayfield Wright, punter Ron Whidbey, and strong safety Cornell Green made the Pro Bowl. Lilly, Nyland, and Wright made All-Pro. The 1972 season got off to a bad start when Roger Staubach separated his shoulder in the preseason and was lost for almost the entire regular season. Despite losing their starting quarterback, a 28-7 win over the Eagles in Week 10 gave the Cowboys an 8-2 record, and they were favored to play in their third Super Bowl in a row. But a 31-10 loss to the 49ers on Thanksgiving Day shook the team's confidence. They won the next two games, but lost their final game to the Giants, 23-3. They had to settle for a wild card berth and traveled to San Francisco for the playoffs. Dallas fell behind 28-13 with little time remaining in the game. Roger Staubach came off the bench, and the Cowboys pulled off an unlikely comeback to win the game 30-28. Now they would travel to Washington, D.C. to play the Redskins in the NFC Championship. Washington led 10-3 going into the fourth quarter and then ran away with a decisive 26-3 victory. Running backs Calvin Hill and Walt Garrison made the Pro Bowl, along with Bob Lilly, John Nyland, Mel Renfro, Cornell Green, and Rayfield Wright. Wright and Nyland also made All-Pro. After outscoring their first three opponents 105-30, it looked like the Cowboys would breeze through the 1973 season. But they lost 3 of their next 4 games. They won 6 of the next 7 to finish 10-4 and would have home field advantage in the postseason. Dallas beat the Rams 27-16 to advance to the NFC Championship for the 4th year in a row. But 2 of their top players, Bob Lilly and Calvin Hill, were lost to injuries during the playoff game against the Rams. The Cowboys were no match for the Vikings, losing 27-10, and the season was over. Calvin Hill, Bob Lilly, John Nyland, Rayfield Wright, Mel Renfro, and middle linebacker Leroy Jordan made the Pro Bowl. Rayfield Wright also made All-Pro. For the first time since 1965, the Cowboys did not make it to the postseason. After digging themselves a big hole, losing 4 of their first 5 games, the 1974 Cowboys rebounded to win 7 of their next 9. But their 8-6 record wasn't good enough to qualify for the playoffs. Calvin Hill, Rayfield Wright, Leroy Jordan, guard Blaine Nye, free safety Cliff Harris, and wide receiver Drew Pearson made the Pro Bowl. Pearson also made All-Pro. The Cowboys were an aging team, and many changes were made during the off-season. Some players, such as 14-year veteran Bob Lilly, retired, while others were traded. 12 rookies named the Dirty Dozen made the 1975 team. Many so-called experts predicted a long season for the Cowboys, but after 4 weeks, the Cowboys had yet to lose a game. They went 6-4 the rest of the way to finish the regular season with 10 wins and 4 losses. They traveled to Minnesota and outplayed the 12-2 Vikings in the famous Hail Mary game. The 17-14 win had them traveling to Los Angeles to face the powerful 13-2 Rams in the NFC Championship. Dallas played a nearly perfect game, destroying LA 37-7. Now it was on to Miami to play in their 3rd Super Bowl in the last 6 years. Going into the 4th quarter, With a 10-7 lead, it looked like the Cowboys might pull off another upset against the defending world champion Pittsburgh Steelers. But the Steelers came back to win 21-17. While it was a disappointing loss, it was a season no one would forget. Roger Staubach, Cliff Harris, and Rayfield Wright made the Pro Bowl. After 10 weeks, the 1976 Cowboys were 9-1 and were favored to play in their 4th Super Bowl. But they lost 3 of their next 5 games, including a 14-12 loss to the Rams in the playoffs. Roger Staubach, Drew Pearson, Blaine Nye, Rayfield Wright, tight end Billy Joe Dupree, defensive end Harvey Martin, and safeties Charlie Waters and Cliff Harris made the Pro Bowl. Harris and Pearson also made All-Pro. The one missing ingredient that was keeping the Cowboys from another Super Bowl victory was a dominant running attack. Dwayne Thomas was traded prior to the 1972 season after a contract dispute. Calvin Hill left the team after the 1974 season to play in the newly formed World Football League. And Walt Garrison retired prior to the 1975 season after injuring his knee in the rodeo. The Cowboys got what they needed when they drafted running back Tony Dorsett for the 1977 season. The Cowboys were undefeated after 8 games, but then hit a bump in the road, losing 2 in a row. They won their next 4 games to finish the regular season with 12 wins and 2 losses, which was their best record since 1968. Dallas would have home field advantage in the playoffs. They easily defeated the Chicago Bears 37-7, which meant they would play in the NFC Championship for the 6th time in the last 7 years. The Cowboys had no trouble with the Vikings, winning 23-6. They marched into the Super Bowl with a 14-2 record and destroyed the Broncos 27-10 for their 2nd Vince Lombardi trophy. Roger Staubach, Charlie Waters, Billy Joe Dupree, Drew Pearson, Cliff Harris, Harvey Martin, Randy White, and kicker Efren Herrera made the Pro Bowl. Harris, Martin, and Pearson also made All-Pro. After a Week 10 loss to the Dolphins, the 1978 Cowboys appeared to be sleepwalking with a 6-4 record. But the sleeping giant woke up and won their next 6 regular season games. They did not have an easy time with the Falcons in the playoff game, pulling out a 27-20 win. The Cowboys would now travel to Los Angeles for the NFC Championship. Dallas won 28-0, but the score was a bit misleading as the game was tied 0-0 at halftime. The game went into the 4th quarter with the Cowboys up 7-0 before they finally wore down the Rams and took over the game. The team would now travel to Miami to play in their 5th Super Bowl in the last 9 years. They would play the Steelers, the first rematch in Super Bowl history. Dallas gave Pittsburgh all it could handle, but they came up 4 points short, just as they had 3 years earlier. Roger Staubach, Tony Dorsett, Billy Joe Dupree, Cliff Harris, Randy White, Harvey Martin, Charlie Waters, linebacker Thomas Henderson, and receiver Tony Hill made the Pro Bowl. Cliff Harris and Randy White made All-Pro. At the halfway point of the 1979 season, the Cowboys were 7-1 and looked like they might be on their way to another Super Bowl. But suddenly, the Cowboys went into a terrible slump, losing 4 of their next 5 games. They won their final 3 games, including a wild come-from-behind victory against the Redskins in the season finale. The team appeared to be hitting their stride just in time for the postseason, but the Rams pulled off an upset, beating Dallas 21-19 in the playoffs. Roger Staubach, Tony Hill, Randy White, Harvey Martin, Cliff Harris, tackle Pat Donovan, middle linebacker Bob Brunick, and guard Herb Scott made the Pro Bowl. Randy White also made All-Pro. Here's the bottom line. The Cowboys' regular season record was 105 wins and 39 losses. And that was the best record of any team in the 1970s. Their postseason record was 14 wins and 7 losses. They had 7 division titles. They won 5 NFC titles and 2 Super Bowl titles. Well, that will conclude our podcast for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care and God bless.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Darren Hayes, host of the Pigskin Dispatch and Jersey Dispatch podcast. I hope you've enjoyed another great episode here on Sports History Network. Now, speaking of sports history, this episode was brought to you by Firefly Books, and they have 2 great ones for you this summer. For basketball fans, they have the NBA 75, the definitive history by author Dave Zarum, who's appeared on our Jersey Dispatch podcast recently. He tells about the experience, the thrilling journey of the NBA, from its humble beginnings to its modern glory. Uncover the untold stories of triumph, controversy, and the greatest stars of the game. This isn't just a book. It's courtside seats to over 75 years of NBA history. And for the golf enthusiasts, swing into The Golf Round I'll Never Forget by Matt Adams. Relive 50 of golf's most memorable moments through the eyes of the legends themselves. From Garcia's triumph at the 2017 Masters to Nicklaus' miraculous 1986 comeback, it's the closest you'll get to walking the fairways with golf's greatest. Get your summer read on. Grab a copy of NBA 75 or The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, available online or at your favorite bookstore.